काबिल कदर मेहमानान गिरामी हमारे साथ मौजूद हैं, उनके काबिल कदर ख्यालात से आगाही का मौका हम सबको मिलेगा। हमारा टॉपिक है डिनाइंग रेफ्यूज, द इम्पैक्ट ऑफ क्लोजिंग बॉर्डर्स टू अफगान रेफ्यूजीज। इंतहाई हसास मामला है। इस अहम सेशन को मॉडरेट करने के लिए मैं रिक्वेस्ट करूँगी जाहिर हुसैन साहब से कि वो अपना भी और अपने पैनलिस्ट का भी तारुफ कराएं और आगे इस सेशन को लेके चलें। जाहिर हुसैन साहब, बहुत शुक्रिया।
Thank you so much and welcome to you all for this session. I have a very distinguished panel to discuss this issue, which is one of the gravest problems or crisis in today's world, and that is what is happening in Afghanistan and its impact. The United Nations, Special Envoy, the UN Envoy, has recently told the Security Council that Afghanistan is the brink of a disaster and a catastrophic, humanitarian catastrophe. And the magnitude of that could be assessed by the fact that 92% of Afghan population may be living below poverty line by the next year. And the situation is not going to improve. And the worst aspect of it is that that has forced many millions of Afghans into refuge, taking refuge in other countries. And that has become the biggest crisis at the moment. According to UNHCR, 2.8 million Afghan refugees are there, 2.9 to 4 million internal displaced people in Afghanistan, and close to a 250,000 people are seeking asylum in different countries. And that goes on that 15 to 20% of Afghans are either internally displaced or are seeking asylum or living abroad. So that seriously is a very serious problem, and it has impact beyond Afghanistan and beyond the region. And we are going to discuss this issue and its impact on the regional countries and also on the global politics. With me is Honorable Adrola Caminera, the Ambassador of the European Union. And then we have Tammy Shah, UNHCR Deputy Representative in Pakistan. And we have Sibyl Khan, who is working for UNDP. And then we also have Mohsin Dawar with us, and he does not need an introduction. Online, we will also be joined by Ursula Niamat. She is an academic and founder of Women and Youth Leadership in Afghanistan. And Qazi Marzai Babar Khail, she will also come on the line. Unfortunately, some of them have not been given visa, otherwise they would have been here with us, and that would have made the discussion much more useful. But for unknown reasons, they have been denied visa. So let me start with Ambassador Azrullah.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for this very kind invitation to be on that panel. I have promised myself to each time that I'm on a panel where there are more women than men to actually thank for that. So I start with that. The title of the panel, The Impact of Closing Borders to Afghan Refugees. What I will try and do in the next few minutes is to break down that title into separate parts and then try and bring it all together. So I start with the impact of closing borders generally, and then we can go into the specific Afghan situation. As can be observed anywhere where there is a border that suddenly closes, even if we assume that 50% of the products were on one side of the border, 50% of the products on the other, and 50% of the customers or the markets or the people buying those products are on either side of the border. When there's a closure, there is a definite disruption of the market forces. And when there is a closure, it also it's very important to consider the speed with which the closure takes place. Because if it's a sudden closure, of course the markets and the lives of those people don't have the time to adjust to the new realities. So when we're talking about the closure of the Afghan border, that was done quickly, and I think time for adjustment is still necessary. If adjustment doesn't take place, as we've seen in other situations, two things can happen. You can have large numbers of IDPs, those people that on either side of the border whose life depended on the fact that there was a bigger market to sell their products, would either internally move or because their lives will suddenly change. Quite often there are opportunities for recruitment of extremist groups with those people. So I'm not making any judgment on what happened on the Afghan border, but I think it's very important to consider each part of the title and try and put it together afterwards. So the next point I would like to raise is Afghanistan and the humanitarian situation, because in order to see what potentially could be the effect on this side of the border, it's very important to see what's happening within the country. So, before August 15, it is not that there was no humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. In fact, the European Union for many decades has been providing humanitarian aid to Afghans in Afghanistan. You heard some of the figures that Zahid mentioned. I will not go into addressing the figures, but overall there was something like 14 million people in need of humanitarian support. This is before August. Afghanistan is having the third year of a severe drought with approximately 30% less wheat production this year. There are a number of other problems that are compounded. You've heard the numbers of IDPs. And let me also say that the humanitarian community was also quite stretched to provide humanitarian aid to meet the needs of the Afghan population, even before the middle of August. So we have a situation where very large numbers of people were needing humanitarian aid even before the last developments. Now, of course, to the existing problems, you have the problem of a lack of cash and also the fact that quite a few of the international NGOs that used to be in Afghanistan providing humanitarian aid have subsequently left. So Afghans and Afghan refugees in Pakistan, Tammy I'm sure will be giving all the details, but it's important to remember that there is a part which is part of the Afghans in Pakistan are recognized as having refugee status, about 1.4 million, and 1.6 million are considered immigrants. Here I would like to underline the generosity of the Pakistani state vis-a-vis these Afghans that have been here for many decades. And the European Union has repeatedly congratulated Pakistan for actually providing services to these people for so many years. We have also been supporting Pakistan in addressing the needs of the Afghans in Pakistan, and let me underline, not just the needs of the Afghans in Pakistan, but also the needs of the host communities where there are a large number of Afghan refugees. Thank you. Okay. So if we look at the humanitarian situation now in Afghanistan, and I'm sure the other panelists will be addressing that, but just a few headlines. It is considered that over 95% of the population currently are not receiving enough calories per day. They're not eating enough calories per day. It is estimated that over 30 million people are food insecure. This makes the situation in Afghanistan the biggest humanitarian disaster that the humanitarian community had to face. If you just want to put it in context, in places like Yemen, we were talking about 22 million people in need, Syria equally. So we have the largest potential population of people in need in a context where some of the international NGOs have left, the UN system hasn't, but there's a need to have a lot more humanitarian workers on the ground to address those needs. And even if every humanitarian worker that was in Afghanistan before the 15th of August is still there, which is not the case, they will have to deal with double the number of people in need. A very daunting task indeed. And I know that they're doing a formidable job, and the European Union Humanitarian Office is in Kabul, is in Afghanistan, and we have increased the aid to humanitarian aid to Afghanistan by 6 times. So in the beginning of the year, we were providing 57 million euros of aid, humanitarian aid. Now it's over 300 million euros, plus an additional 250 million humanitarian plus. But, and of course, this is very, very good. But another point to underline, in no situation can you substitute or replace having some of the government institutions functioning. Again, an example, only 15% of the healthcare facilities in Afghanistan are currently functioning. If you're providing humanitarian aid in healthcare, you depend on those healthcare facilities functioning in order to distribute the medicine, in order to have the nurses and the other staff that you might need to have there. So an additional complication. And over and above that, if you're distributing aid, particularly to women and children, in the cultural context of Afghanistan, you absolutely need, and I underline absolutely need, women humanitarian aid workers. A very poor, let's say, in the context of an African country, for example, if you have a mother, widow mother with lots of children, she can go and ask for help, she can move around, she has no cultural limitations to actually approaching some of the international humanitarian aid workers. In the context of Afghanistan, it's very important that you have a woman humanitarian aid worker, and even some of the ones that were there may be more restricted in providing aid. So, which brings me to another facet of closing the borders. Closing the borders fully. Is there no people coming across the border? There are reports that potentially people are coming over the border. It is unknown what numbers we're talking about and how they're coming over. And let's assume that borders are fully closed. My previous job before coming to Pakistan as ambassador here, I was director for humanitarian aid of the European Commission. And I have seen situations, and very, very closely, the Rohingya situation, the Rohingya exodus into Bangladesh. First reaction of Bangladesh, we will close the borders. They maintained this position for a certain period of time, and then they could no longer maintain this position. Another example, South Sudanese refugees into Uganda. Again, there were 1 to 2 million people. First reaction of Uganda, we will close the borders. People started moving, there was a closing of the border, they had to open at some point. Third example, Venezuelans into Colombia. So one from Asia, one from Africa, one from Latin America. Same gut reaction initially from Colombia. We will not open the borders. We don't want these refugees here. People started congregating at the border points. At some point, Colombian refugees, Venezuelan refugees were allowed into Colombia. So in my view, another complication that Pakistan has with respect to whether or not borders would be closed is that you have large number of Afghan refugees in the country already. So, so what will happen if all of these potentially hungry people move towards the border? What will happen about maintaining the borders closed? I don't know. But international experience has shown that it is very, very difficult to maintain the borders closed when there is mass movement of people. And when people are hungry, there tends to be mass movement of people. So I just wanted to say those opening remarks, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You have been dealing with the refugee problem in Pakistan for months, and you know better what the situation like. One of our expectations was that there will be huge influx of refugees as the conflict in Afghanistan got worse, but it seems that it has not happened yet. So what's your anticipation? Because now the humanitarian situation is so bad that the people who were not driven by conflict may be driven to take refuge in Pakistan and other neighboring countries because of hunger and because of other problems.
Okay, thank you. And thank you in particular for the opportunity for UNHCR to be able to speak today. It's been quite encouraging for the last day and a half now to be part of a human rights conference in Pakistan that has also included the right to seek asylum and the Afghan situation. In taking into account the character of this conference, the fact that this is predominantly a civil society event, I would like to hone in on a critical aspect to realizing human rights, in particular, realizing the right to seek asylum and its legitimacy. There's many dimensions to how to promote refugee rights and also how to promote the right to seek asylum. But this one on legitimacy, I think, is of vital importance and very well fits for this type of conference. Suleyman Jahangir aptly stated at the opening yesterday that states can close borders, but states cannot close minds and hearts. I'd like to kind of turn that one around a little bit and say that open hearts and minds can create incentives and space for a government to open their borders. Pakistan, as the EU ambassador has noted, has been hosting refugees. It's for 40 years. The Afghan situation is a protracted refugee situation. And when we speak about the current situation and the current dimensions of the crisis right now, we cannot forget this past. They are kind of twined up together. There's been millions of Afghans here in Pakistan for decades. Pakistan has been one of the largest hosting refugee countries over those 40 decades. Right now, it's currently the third largest in view of the situation in Syria and also in Venezuela. And this past is influencing the current approach the government is taking towards the Afghan situation. And here, I'd like to point out that we are observing a lot of growing anti-refugee rhetoric. We see this in social media. We see it in the printed press, particularly in terms of op-ed pieces. It's rare to see a pro-refugee tweet op-ed piece. I also heard it when I spoke on another panel. And on that panel was a range of different actors. We had a member of parliament, we had a retired general, we had an academic, we had a journalist, and it was hosted by a think tank. And the panel was discussing the situation in Afghanistan, but it was not very pro-refugee. In fact, there was the main expression across all these individuals was fatigue for hosting refugees and the economic and the security cost that this has placed on Pakistan. UNHCR were present at the two main border crossings, Chadman and Torkham. I've visited both of those border crossings. And the image that I have taken away from there and that sticks with me the strongest is the fence. There are incredible security mechanisms that have been put in place at the borders. You've got a fence, you've got security mechanisms, you have the military front and center on there. And I think this also speaks volumes that we need to take into account as we look at how we move forward. Further compounding this current situation and the challenges that we're facing is a lack of a legal framework on refugee matters. Despite having hosted refugees for 40 years, Pakistan has never ratified the 1951 Refugee Convention. It has not ratified the 1967 Protocol. The country also does not have any refugee legislation in place. They've been managing this situation through administrative procedures. Through these kind of mechanisms, it places refugees in a very precarious state because we just recently advocated for the documentation that the Afghan refugees have to be extended. It's extended until June 2023. We will soon have to go into another negotiation for that to be extended beyond June 2023 to make sure that people can move around the country. They can continue to have access to public schools. Pakistan, despite not having these measures in place, has been quite progressive. And I think when we look at the situation, we need to acknowledge how progressive they have been. And I say that as somebody who's worked in a number of different contexts with UNHCR. They allow the freedom of movement. They allow people to have access to their public schools. However, we need legislation in place. We need to be able to not constantly be negotiating refugee rights. Currently, UNHCR has three main preoccupations concerning this current situation. We're worried about safeguarding the protection space that has existed for these refugees for the last 40 years. And it has been a very peaceful coexistence in large part. We are also very worried about ensuring that people, Afghans who need to seek asylum, are able to seek asylum because the right to seek asylum, it's not to come here for a job. It can be a life-saving right. We also are very concerned about forced returns to Afghanistan. We issued an advisory on a global level in mid-August in saying that no Afghans should be forcibly returned back to their country. We are in a constant dialogue with the government on these matters. This dialogue is largely out of the press. I think you probably heard it most when our High Commissioner was here in September, most recently. We're under very serious pressures. As I tried to underscore above, we are talking about lives. The right to seek asylum is about lives. And we're also talking about the 1.4 million Afghans that are here right now in this country and that have refugee status. As has been very well outlined, there is a dire humanitarian crisis taking place in Afghanistan. UNHCR is doing its best to scale up alongside other humanitarian actors to be able to respond. But I think it also came out quite clearly yesterday in listening to some of the discussions that there is also a range of ongoing human rights violations in the country. You also have a government that is not inclusive. And I think one speaker very well honed in and illustrated how deep of a challenge the country is facing when he flagged that there is a need for a social contract between the Taliban government and its people, and that at this point in time, there's not even a discussion about such a social contract. There is also still many people, many Afghans who are still in Afghanistan fighting for the future of their country, human rights activists, female activists, and journalists were some of the people that were flagged. And depending on how that situation progresses, these are the types of people who may still need to be seeking asylum. And so to return back to this question of legitimacy, and in particular here, it's the perceived legitimacy by the Pakistani people. We can say as the UN, what is the legitimacy inside international law? But it's that legitimacy that the people feel that is absolutely a core component to protecting Afghan refugees who are here and protecting the right to seek asylum of those who may need it. Many of you in this audience are key partners in helping us to create an environment that is conducive to upholding refugees and asylum seekers' rights. You're having a rights-based discussion here. This is vital. The last panel I was on was not a rights-based discussion. It was a discussion about fears and fatigue. So we need more discussions such as this. This public dialogue needs to continue here with Impact. This is going to be central to upholding these rights. So thank you again for inviting UNHCR and for caring enough to include refugees and asylum seekers on your agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tammy. Now we also have online Ursula Nemat here, and I have already introduced her. She is an academic and founder of Women and Youth Leadership Program. So my question to you, Ursula, is that how do you see the situation in Afghanistan? It's a quite grim situation as being presented by UN, different reports. Do you see more people trying to get out of the country in the present situation, or is there any hope?
Thank you very much, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my great honor and pleasure to take part virtually in this very important discussion. I have to start with sending my salutes and admirations for the late Asma Jahangir, and really to say that I'm honored to be part of this conversation every year. My sincere apologies for not making it there in person. I have to say mainly due to medical reasons. I haven't attempted to get a visa, but I'm wishing really that for the next round, inshallah, hopefully I will be there in person with all of you. We are in a very challenging situation, and looking into the conversations, as other distinguished panelists have also mentioned, I think the point that the issue of refugees is part of this human rights conference in itself is a very important one, particularly in a situation in Pakistan where we see there are more restrictions and limitations to the Afghan people trying to get to reach there under this new condition. I'm also trying to talk here as someone who had the experience of living in Pakistan for 14 years as a refugee. While we are concerned and always quite critical of the approaches from the officials and the formal systems and regimes, as mentioned before, it's critical and important to also appreciate the fact that the people of Pakistan, the communities, the recipient communities have always opened their houses. They have been extremely cooperative and supportive throughout these times of difficult and challenging for the Afghans to reach there. Now, it is an extremely grim situation. As mentioned by other distinguished panelists, every country going into a deep conflict like we are at the moment in Afghanistan the first thing that happens, the neighbors close their doors because they know that there will be influx of refugees. So analytically speaking, why this is happening with Pakistan in Afghanistan is quite important to note. For example, for the Pakistani state, their assumption was that the Taliban are popular in Afghanistan. The people, this is the narrative in Pakistan, that the people of Afghanistan like the Taliban. So why would they run away from a ruling power there? What we see is actually a different situation. Of course, there are not only the Taliban are not the main driving factors in the refugee and migration, there is the whole world leaving Afghanistan alone. So now responding to your question in regard with what is the situation in Afghanistan, I think the situation in Afghanistan across the country, from north to south, east to west, everywhere, is extremely grim. I'm in daily contact with people, and the biggest difference between this phase of crisis in Afghanistan in comparison to the past is that this is true, there is not physical violence. But violence also is not necessarily the existence of killings and shootings and bombings and suicide attacks or air bombardment and so forth. Violence is also denial of the right for people to earn, denial of the right for people to have access to their salaries, to their savings in the banks. So, ladies and gentlemen, don't think this is an exaggeration when people say that over 30 million people in Afghanistan are not having enough food to eat. And we're not talking about the poorest of the, we are talking about the middle class, we are talking about the government officials, the NGO workers, the the small and medium enterprises, the private sector, everyone is suffering in the country. So, I mean, if in one point, we are also raising the question that what is the fault of the 38 million people to pay for the mistakes of the region, for the mistakes of the international community? Really, this is a question from my people to the world, to everyone. I hope one day we will get answers, because the biggest punishment of all the current situation and the limitation and restrictions is beared by the people of Afghanistan. The reason you see a massive level of influx, and honestly, the stories I'm hearing about young Afghans trying desperately to leave through Torkham border or Chaman Boldak border is unbelievable. They are experiencing a real death multiple times before they cross a border that is just a matter of a few minutes to cross it in a normal situation, not even an hour. So the situation is extremely dire. And if the economic crisis in Afghanistan is not resolved as soon as possible, you simply will have to expect more refugees moving out of Afghanistan using any kind of border possibilities. I was thinking about, one of the very sort of important impacts of this closure of borders. You create closure of the former borders. What happens? People don't give up. People are desperate. You will be desperate if you put yourself in their place. They will use the illegal means. So illegal migration, we know existed and exists and will exist under the circumstances and conditions. I think even for the states, it's more dangerous. So really for Pakistan and for Iran and for many other countries neighboring Afghanistan, if they close completely the borders and create aggressive restrictions, this will not end the problem. Probably this is the right time, if I may go a little bit out of the refugee discussions and bring it back to the causes of refugees and migration, is how Pakistan can use their leverages over the Taliban to at least, if they cannot solve the problem of the economic crisis, they solve the rights problem and give the young Afghans, men and women, but particularly the women, a kind of a sense of acceptance. High schools are closed, universities are closed, government offices are closed, although women are promised to be paid for their salaries if they are working in public sector and so forth. That's at least a good move. But if there are promises, real promises, not fake ones, obviously, for these people to be allowed to be able to continue their studies, to continue their universities, their whole investment they have made on their lives, accepting the risks for their lives to access, schools and reaching to the higher level of education. If they are given that promise, and that promise is a real one, that they will have access to education, maybe they will not think of running away from their country to neighboring countries. So our hope is to really get more practical in terms of providing a better situation in the country so that nobody had to force themselves to leave the country. But I mean, presently speaking, a priority needs to be there in terms of those who are making it to Pakistan. What kind of rights do they have? How can they also legally and within the legal frameworks for the rights for them as refugees and as refugees that are in transit to other countries, they can live there? Because there are different factors that drives people towards Pakistan, for example. One is really to seek survival. Survival meaning find at least a job on daily basis to feed themselves and their families. There are also people who move out of the Afghanistan for purposes of trade. And we have seen that how during the Afghan fruit seasons, during the Afghan trading seasons, some excuse every year happens that closes the border. Our desire and hope is to see an end to this kind of relations. We need, as neighbors, as countries that exist next to each other, to have more constructive relations in future. My hope and my desire is this platform, the platform that is founded by one of the women who is a hero for all of us in the entire probably Asian region, as someone who believed in the rights of people. To make this platform a place for a real conversation, more constructive conversation that can give us a coexistence next to each other with more friendly and more helpful relationship. If there are situations better in the country, nobody will be forced to leave their places. So I'm happy to continue the conversation, but the overall, just to sort of conclude, the overall condition in Afghanistan is one of the main drivers of this current migration influx in the region, particularly towards Pakistan, and that requires an immediate and urgent action by the neighboring countries, by countries with higher leverage over the Taliban, and also by the international community. I thank you and look forward for further conversation.
You come from the area which has borne the brunt of whatever is happening across the border, and still the situation in Afghanistan could also have a direct impact on the other side of the border, and we have already seen that implication. Now the borders are also seems to have been closed. So what do you think actually going to be the impact of that?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think the impact we are already witnessing is not too good. And we have seen patients, we have seen elder people on daily basis, they are stopped who want to come to Pakistan. And after the in the post 15th August scenario, there are some divided tribes which lives on both sides of the border. And there was almost no issue. There used to be some time, but mostly there was no issue for them to move around on the border. But even they are facing too much problems after 15th August. And there is only selected people who are allowed, who has some references, or who, I'm sorry to say, who bribe some people on the border. Only they are allowed. The rest is there is no policy till now, and nobody knows what has to be done with the Afghan refugees coming across the border. As I said, as one of our panelists said in the start, that Pakistan hasn't signed any the 1957 refugee convention, and there is no law locally also. We do not have any law, we do not have any legislation for the refugees. And similarly, we do not have any policy also, as as it was said before me also, that we have been handling them administratively, but this time there is no policy as till now. And even if you ask for some credible data of how many people have crossed the border after the 15th August, we do not have even that also, and nobody is, everybody's. So all these things, it are making the situation even more difficult, because Pakistan is, although we are very good in educating for them across the world to recognize the government of Islamic Emirates of Afghanistan, but when it comes to to addressing the humanitarian crisis, we do not have any policy. We are not allowing the refugees who wants to come. And I will also like to second one of the other panelists who said that there was a narrative here in Pakistan that Taliban have a popular support in Afghanistan, and I think the influx and the gauge of the people who wants to go out of Afghanistan, it very clearly shows that how much popular support Taliban have in Afghanistan. And if we go into the past, the way Pakistan have been treating the Afghan refugees in the past, till now there is no adjustment of these refugees which have been here for almost 40 years, and they still cannot get citizenship. Although Prime Minister Imran Khan has said that I will give them all those people who have who was born in Pakistan, I will give them citizenship rights. But till now, I don't know that who is governing this country, because if a prime minister announces something and it is not implemented, the same thing, when the Muttaqi came here, the foreign minister of the same kind of statement he issued about the trade with India. But still, that is also not been implemented. There is one more area which I would like to highlight, is the discrimination in our Citizenship Act. It is, and I would like to highlight it because it mostly happens with the refugees and the Afghan refugees who have been living there. The refugee law is so much discriminatory, gender discriminatory, that if a Pakistani man, if he marries any Afghan woman or any other foreigner woman, that woman gets citizenship. But if any foreigner, if any Afghan woman or if any other foreign woman, if she marries a Pakistani, if any Afghan man marries, if any Pakistani man marries, I'm just confusing between those two, but it is not given in the case of a woman. It is not provided in the case of a Pakistani woman marrying a foreigner, marrying an Afghan man. That family is not given nationality. And I have submitted a legislation twice in this current tenure, and both of the times it was rejected without any justification. And I requested even the human rights minister also, that I said that you are also a woman. How can you accept such kind of a discrimination, that if something is okay for a man, but that is not okay for women? If a Pakistani woman wants to marry an Afghan man, he will not get or any other foreign men, he will not get the nationality. So these things, which these things also need them to be addressed. And apart from that, till now, I guess whatever I have heard from the local NGOs who are working on the part of the UNHCR or even the UNHCR, at least there is no policy which is in our knowledge about the Afghan refugees coming right now. All those who have made to Pakistan, they go to UNHCR and they get registered, and they are of the perception. I don't know whether someone have told them or from somewhere else. They are of the perception that we will get a call within 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and we will be told that you will be permitted to go to XYZ countries, the countries which you have mentioned with the UNHCR. Well, but when we contacted these agencies, they do not have any policy till now, and people are waiting. So these things also needs to be addressed, and the most important thing is the treatment of the patients. Because most of the people living in Afghanistan, specifically those who live in the border areas in Afghanistan, they were mostly dependable on the hospitals here in Pakistan. And on daily basis, we get requests from people across the border that we want to bring some patients for treatment. And they also have to face the same kind of problem, and they do not have. They did made a policy for a health visa, but after the 15th August, everything has changed and nothing is happening normally. Although I think it should have been more simplified after the 15th August now, because there is a bigger humanitarian crisis right now. But instead of making it easier, it's now even more harder. I have got calls from many people in Afghanistan who got Pakistani visas, but they were still not allowed to cross the border on Torkham and Ghulam Khan or Chaman, from anywhere, and they were asked for a security pass, and the security pass is, it's a very, very, very it used to be a very prolonged procedure. And we were informed that the cabinet has decided that this security pass will no more be required. But still, people are facing too many problems. The police harassment and the way the Afghan refugees have been treated, I think we do not have a very good track record about that also. And also the closure of the border, which is again, if we want to close the border with India, I think it's only been done after the approval of the federal cabinet. But in case of Afghanistan, it is closed. Nobody knows that who has instructed them, but just simple, the army personnel who is in charge on the border, he just orders simple, no procedure is being followed, no cabinet do not know even that what is happening on the border. So this is also, too much discriminatory in the context of Afghanistan. I would like to sum it up in this at the end, that we need to formulate a policy locally also, internationally also. Everybody needs to formulate a policy for the Afghan refugees. Specifically, the burden, most of the burden comes on Pakistan. Because if this humanitarian crisis, it increases, the bribe wire, it cannot stop the mass influx of people from Afghanistan. Like if 1,000 of people they decide to cross the border, they cannot be stopped through a barbed wire, and so there should be some proper policy for the Afghan refugees, and also all the donor agencies and all the international community, because you know the problem of the Afghanistan is not local, it has been and it is an international problem. And if it wasn't if it is not sorted out properly, I think situation will become worse, and after that nobody will be able to control it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohsen. Information Minister Fawad Chaudhry was supposed to be on this session, but I don't know why didn't he turn up, and he could have answered some of your questions probably. I'm not sure that he could have, but he's not there, and nobody is from the government to answer, and I can understand the ambiguity. So, Symbol, there's a lot of ambiguity. Okay,
I have to attend another panel.
okay, no problem.
Thank you.
Government has said that they will not accept any more refugees from Afghanistan. And so far what we have seen that, that it was expected that more refugees, there will be a greater influx of refugees because of the conflict. But it may not have happened. But how do you see the situation?
Thank you, Zahid. And first of all, thank you, Asma Jahangir conference for inviting me and giving me an opportunity to be on such a great panel. It's been amazing 2 days. Just coming back to your question, Zahid, and after that I'd like to add a few comments to the other comments which had been made before. On Pakistani government stance, why are they reacting the way they have reacted? We have in the past accepted a large number of refugees, officially, unofficially. Some say we did look after them well. Some others have a different position on that. There's been some successes and some failures. What is driving this closure of border that is the kind of lead topic of this panel? I think there are two elements that I see very clearly. One is driven from a very high level, state policy making level, where you look at the geopolitics of what's happened in Afghanistan. Pakistani government feels that the last 20 years there was an international military and government building attempt in Afghanistan. They agreed with parts of it, they did not agree with parts of it. Pakistan government was also seen to be almost one of the only countries in the world which consistently supported the Taliban's inclusion in some form of a political setup. They feel that now, as the change has happened in August 15, the Taliban have taken over, and the international community, and especially the US and other NATO-aligned countries, would like to step away from that and say, well, now the Taliban have taken over, these are actors that we don't support, they are on sanction lists, and there will be no support, and they will not recognize the Taliban government, which looks quite plausible right now. And there will be no support given to Afghans and a Taliban-led Afghanistan, which is going to create a huge problem for Pakistan, including some of the other neighboring countries. So by closing the border, by having a very strong policy on Afghanistan, it's an attempt by the Pakistani government to push the international community to provide one way or the other, provide not just humanitarian support, but actually full development support to the Afghan government. As you all may know, that 95% or 97% of the budget of the Afghan government came from international sources. So it's a very common view in the Pakistani policymakers. The other element related to this that has defined Pakistan's closure of the border and not really acknowledging the number of people moving in or trying to have a clear policy is that they feel that they are afraid that things are going to get much worse in Afghanistan. It's a very clearly articulated fear that we hear constantly when you talk to the policymakers. They are seriously worried that, of course, the Taliban are not be able to, deal with the humanitarian situation unfolding, but also there might be some legitimacy issues internally. We can see a reversal to conflict, and that, the situation is going to escalate in Afghanistan. And if they provide a clear refugee policy, if there is a view in Afghanistan, at least in the Afghan people, that Pakistan can be a safe haven, there will be a faster influx inside of refugees. And they want to prevent both by having a very, very hard position. But saying that, and my other colleagues here have spoken in really great detail on the border closure situation. But the reality, I'm just coming from Balochistan 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, had a long kind of a stay there to look at the same situation. The reality is very different. There are more, just in Balochistan, our civil society partners reported there are more than 70,000 people, Afghans, that have come in post August 15. There are right now 92 different points on the border just in Balochistan where reportedly people cross in through human smugglers with support of all kinds of illicit human actors. What the government, while all this is going on, the government has a very, very harsh stance on the refugees within these, both Balochistan and also in KP, less in KP, we are hearing less in KP, but more in Balochistan. There is very little tolerance. Civil society actors who do support refugees and are working with them are being picked up. There have been instances where they were picked up, especially with the Hazaras, and questioned and intimidated by government actors on supporting to the refugees. This is causing huge amount of issues, not just for the refugees themselves or the migrants themselves, the Afghan migrants, especially women and children and other vulnerable groups, but also for the host communities. The host communities in often cases are themselves older refugees and migrants. They are already very vulnerable. They live in almost ghetto-like situation on the peripheries of the cities. Their resources are depleted. And also this pushes when there is, and we also know from the context of violent extremism, radicalization, that we've talked extensively on rights, on challenges to human rights coming from these extremist elements and militant organizations, which we've heard extensively last 2 days in this very great conference. Organized actors, whenever the government leaves that space in the society, in vulnerable, especially with vulnerable communities, every time the government steps away, where we see it stepping away, where it is not acknowledging a problem and it acknowledging an issue under its nose, these areas are always, these spaces are always filled in by non-state actors, which causes huge amount of destabilization and stabilization challenges, not just for the Afghans or the refugees or the migrants, but also Pakistani host communities. It strengthens those elements, it strengthens the play, and that space is being filled up. My personal feel is they will not be able to continue hiding your head in the sand with this issue. It's a reality. I know they've closed the border, they're hardening the border, they've hardened the border, but sooner or later they will need to come out with a very clear policy. Right now, they're not even allowing international organizations like UNHCR and others working on the ground to call them Afghan refugees or Afghan migrants. The term that's allowed to be used is called new arrivals. So this kind of ambiguity is injurious not just to the rights of the migrants and the refugees, but also to Pakistan's own challenges that it faces on these two border areas, which are already vulnerable, where it is huge high risk of all kinds of conflict drivers. So my own, kind of two bits, especially a request to our government at this point is to have a clear policy, to have a clarity on this issue. We will not be able to, we will have to continue to deal with what happens in Afghanistan onwards. It's not an event. We cannot take what happened on 15th of August as an event and kind of say, oh, we are dealing with the situation. This situation is yet unfolding, and it is going to have huge impacts, as it has had in the past, on Pakistan itself, on peace and security in Pakistan itself. So I think the clearer we are on whatever strategies and policies we come up, and the government needs to step in and take that space before others take that space for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we already have a complete time, but still we have time for 2 or 3 questions. Please be short and just stick. Yeah, Farida. I think first.
The gentleman was
No.
standing
Oh, sorry.
Sir, Assalamu alaikum. I am Dr. Bilal Afzal. Sir, I closely look at the grim situation and challenges of Afghanistan. I have seen that there is fence between on the borders of Pakistan and Afghanistan, so there lies no question of crossing the border. But in the recent events, we have seen that Taliban government didn't allow the cricket team to play in the UAE. They played with the three colored flag, not with the Taliban flag in the UAE in the Cricket World Cup. So why there is a big contradiction that they do not allow any sport events to play all over the world? Taliban government didn't allow.
Not, yeah.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's really wonderful session. There is no doubt that we're discussing the closing of the borders, but I think we need to think about the neighboring countries opening of the borders. One aspect. My question is that we are thinking about the closing of the border. This is a big challenge, but the problem is that the frozen funds of the government of the Afghanistan is the biggest issue. If the European Union investors, I really request you, if we can work on that side, the frozen funds for the Afghan government released, so that will be a very big help.
Thank you. Just a small comment and a question to the international community representatives here. We are not just closing the border, we are physically throwing people back across the border. And that includes by raiding homes at 1 o'clock in the morning, sending the women and children to the border. We don't know what happens to the men. This has happened multiple times, even when they have visas for onward travel. So you have the older refugees, you have the current refugees. And of course, there is the human rights principle of non-refoulement. You cannot be throwing people out. Pakistan is under international obligations to uphold the international standards and laws to which it is. So my question is, what can really be done so that we can help you negotiate further with it? I understand the UNHCR is not able to register these people because the Pakistan government has no policy. Is there anything civil society can do to come together to take the agenda forward? So for the two of you, basically. But
yeah. Thank you. One more. Please, just a minute.
Thank you. Especially Bronx from Balochistan, where I have my neighbors like refugees. So I have seen there that there is no school facility, there is no health facility for refugees. If international community says that we are funding for them to be for their legislation. So especially Balochistan, like district Pashin, there are 150 plus families of refugees. And the more important thing is that they are raped by the police for just they are refugees. So I have told them that you can raise the question, but they said that no, we can't go because we are refugees and we will be dragged to police stations and cases. So that's why if international community is saying that we have funded or we are giving, so they have not given anything. I think they have given to government, but not to refugees because it is for refugees. So this question is from Timi, that what you are doing now, not in fast governments, now in this situation where Afghanistan is now closed and they are being killed there, activists are, journalists are, and others are. But so what are you doing now?
So, the ambassador, this question is very valid, that on one side the international community has pledged a lot of funds, as you mentioned. Hello. Yeah, on one side, the international community has pledged a lot of fund to aid Afghanistan, but on the other side, there is still financial sanction. So that's a major problem, actually. So reaching the aid to the people of Afghanistan. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Just my first reaction is, unlike the UK High Commissioner, I do not comment on cricket. So, on the other points, the position of the European Union has been quite clear from the beginning and still maintained. Our concern is to help the Afghan people. That's why the figures that I mentioned, we have gone up 6 times on humanitarian aid. We have also put 250 million on humanitarian plus. And we have also indicated that we would look into potentially increasing those funds. With what concerns the Afghan government, we have said that we have identified 5 benchmarks in order to see the progress and engage, because we are engaging. We are engaging with the interim government, but engagement for us does not mean recognition. Engagement is something totally different than recognition. And just to clarify, what are the 5 benchmarks? First one is that the Afghan soil should not be used for terrorism against anybody, any other country. The second one is that the government should be an inclusive government. We have also commented that the current government, we do not consider that it's inclusive, but nonetheless, that's where we are. That there should be human rights in Afghanistan should prevail, and also we're very focused on the plight of women, particularly access for girls for schools. We want to ensure that the international EU and member states citizens can leave the country if they so wish, and also Afghans who might want to leave the country should be allowed to leave the country. And the final benchmark was that humanitarian aid should be allowed to be delivered under international humanitarian law. And what does that mean? It means that the aid goes to the people that are more vulnerable, rather than the aid goes to whoever may be indicated, give aid to these people and not to somebody else. So this is where we are currently, and we are following the situation very, very closely and very concerned about the Afghan people. With respect to non-refoulement and what is happening to the Afghans here, my colleague from UNHCR would reply, but I can tell you as an international organization which values and applies international humanitarian law and all the regulation that goes with it, we are not in agreement with sending back refugees, particularly if they are being sent back to a situation where their lives are at risk. So that we are following closely. Thank you.
I'm not too sure where to start here. There's quite a few points that came out. Let me start with, because we've spoken a bit about the situation globally, and sadly the situation here in Pakistan and the situation throughout this region in response to the Afghan refugee situation and the potential for new influxes is not unique. We are facing globally decreasing support for refugees, decreasing support for asylum seekers. And here I'm using some terms, and maybe I'm using them a little bit without making sure that everybody's understanding. A refugee is somebody who has been recognized with a legal status according to the criteria outlined in the 1951. An asylum seeker is somebody who is applying for refugee status but has not yet been granted. And where there has been, and one of the speakers referenced, there's also been a bit of confusion with the evacuations that took place outside of Afghanistan. One of the core elements to being a refugee means you've crossed an international border. That's a major distinction between being internally displaced inside your country and crossing a border where you are in need of refugee protection to be able to remain in safety in that neighboring country or in another country. There's also been some confusion that's taken place with resettlement and the evacuations, and this has definitely created a lot of confusion within the Afghan community, and we have been receiving a lot of people approaching us thinking we are assisting the governments with the evacuations, which we are not. We do have a third country resettlement program. This, sadly, though, is a very small program because we're dependent upon states to offer us quotas to be able to take individuals from the country where they first sought asylum and be resettled into a third country. That's essentially 1% of the global refugee population. So there are many people approaching us, some for the purposes of asylum, some for aspirations to be resettled, and almost seeing us as we're sort of a travel agency, as was implied. We have been here in Pakistan since the Afghan refugees came in. In our office, we have an agreement with the government of Pakistan that's dating back to 1983. And that agreement recognizes our mandate. Our mandate is inside the 1951 convention, and our role is to protect refugees in line with the 1951 convention and the 67 protocol, and to seek solutions to the refugee plight. So there are people who are approaching us now. We do a registration of those who approach us, and that is in line with our mandate. We are not granting a refugee status. What we are doing is recognizing people as approaching us seeking asylum at this point in time, and we remain in a very regular dialogue. Sometimes that is almost every day of a working week. Sometimes that's a few times during the working week, and it's with many parts of the Pakistan government in trying to put in place measures for us to be able to respond to those who are coming across, and for us to make sure that those borders stay open so that if people are in need of asylum, they can seek it. Because as I said before, and I'll state it again, this can save lives on that point. We also are very alarmed, and when I spoke of our concern for safeguarding the protection space here in the country, that was indirectly a reference to deportations. And we have seen deportations that have been taking place, and this is out of character in Pakistan, and it is one that has put us very much on alarm. For individuals who want to take up advocacy, I would strongly encourage you to refer to the advisory that we issued in mid-August. This will outline, and it states that this is for Afghans regardless of their status. These can be Afghans refugees who have been recognized. This could be the asylum seekers. This could be people who are not even seeking asylum, but because of the precarious situation inside Afghanistan, we are saying no one should be forced back, and that is respecting the principle of refoulement, which correctly as highlighted is customary law, and you do not need a state to have ratified any body related, any instrument, international instrument related to that point. Kindly allow me also to kind of flag something, because a point came up, and I think it's a very valid point that I'd like to underscore. The refugee situation, this is not solely the responsibility of Pakistan. They have a special responsibility as a neighboring country, but as a few years ago we passed, the General Assembly adopted the Global Compact on Refugees, and this very clearly underscored the fact that a refugee situation is a global situation, and it requires global solidarity. And here for the Afghan situation, we have also aligned with this Global Compact and building on an attempt by the governments of Pakistan, Iran, and Afghanistan dating back to 2012 to create a solution strategy for refugees, we've started a support platform here. And here, let me please play also quite a bit of a tribute to our EU ambassador, who is the chair of the core group that we have created here in country, and that brings together 13, or I should say 15 different actors, primarily member states, that are here to work in solidarity with the government of Pakistan and to provide some of the support. And this has also been quite a source of support for UNHCR, and that they have helped us with the advocacy and helped us to continue the discussions with the government to find a way to respond to the situation that's already here, to also be able to jointly plan together for the possibility of going forward. And it was also mentioned, sorry, I know I'm going on, but there was an important point made when there was, in 2017, the Prime Minister had put out an offer of citizenship for the refugees who had been born here. And he's retreated. There's been no action on that. That, to me, is a very clear reflection of the need for political support. He received a lot of backlash on the political process, and this is where civil society, I think, is invaluable in helping us to create a more positive reflection of the Afghan refugees and the contributions that they've had and the host communities that they have been living with and have generously lived with them for 40 years. And as our colleague in Afghanistan, a former refugee herself, even stated, have many a times opened up their doors and their homes to these people on that front. So if we can take that hospitality that has been the norm for so many decades and put that forward again, I think this will help us to safeguard the protection space here and asylum rights. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you so much. Actually, we are already 20 minutes over, but I will give 2 minutes to Ursula Neamat. She wants to say a few words. Dan?
Thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I really thank everyone again for excellent remarks and important points that has been flagged and prioritized. Just to reiterate some of the points and address some of the questions that were mentioned. One key point is related to providing facilities for those who are arriving to Pakistan, those Afghan refugees, particularly in Balochistan, or probably even in the tribal areas. I'm sure these are forgotten areas within Pakistan. And maybe the donor community within Pakistan, the international donor community, needs to really find means to get to those areas, because providing schools, providing hospitals and basic health facilities for those who are probably leaving their countries and crossing this border accepting death because of real threats for their lives is really important. It's the rights of everyone to really have access to those facilities. My other point, the gentleman who was asking about the cricket and the 3-color flag, is this. For majority of the Afghan population, the 3-color flag is their flag. And the same as the cricket team, the love for the Afghan cricket team, who actually were born, most of them were born in Pakistan as a refugee, learned cricket in the refugee time, and now are the only, probably one of the very, very few or only source of hope and smile in the faces of the Afghan people. So we are really happy that they have played under that flag, because that represents the nation, not necessarily the government. Governments come and go, as we say in Afghanistan. We all have seen in our lifetime several regime change, but Afghanistan remains there. So again, it was a very sort of a friendly match that we've played, and Pakistan won over Afghanistan, but then still it was celebrated widely in the country in terms of, actually like a news for these young Afghans who are keeping on making us proud through the sports, through this means. So this is also something that needs to be kept in mind, that the Afghan people, they love their countries. And if they are not forced, if they are not made by the situation to leave the country, they will never do that. So please give the hand to the people in this very difficult and challenging time. And I hope that Pakistan comes to an agreement in terms of having a policy that can regulate this, so that at least international organizations like UNHCR can play the same role they play across the world in terms of identifying people with their status as refugees. Once again, thank you very much, and I hope you all have a great remaining of the conference in Lahore. Many, many greetings. Thanks.
Thank you for the panelists for a lively discussion, and probably we'll have more in future. Thank you so much.